My family called me ugly at my own graduation party, erased me from family photos, then spent 11 years telling everyone I was jealous and unstable. Until I walked into my sister's wedding as a famous surgeon. When the groom turned around at his own wedding and said my name, not to Sloan, not to anyone else, but to me, across a vineyard full of 200 guests, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in 11 years. Seen, not pied, not dismissed, not measured against my sister's cheekbones, and found wanting, just seen by a man who had no idea he was about to detonate every lie my family had spent a decade carefully constructing around my absence. I need to back up because the wedding, the look on my mother's face, the way Sloane's fingers turned white, gripping Nathan's arm, the single word Nathan asked my father that made the whole vineyard go silent. None of it makes sense without the party that started everything, the celebration that was supposed to be about me but never really was. I was 18 years old, standing in my parents' backyard in a blue dress I'd bought off the clearance rack at Target for $14.99. I remember the price because I'd saved up for it myself, bagging groceries at the Kroger on Westerville Road since I was 16. I remember every detail of that afternoon, the way you remember car accidents with strange crystalline clarity, your brain refusing to let you forget even the parts you'd give anything to lose. Full academic scholarship to Ohio State. Full ride, not a loan, not a partial grant. Every dollar covered, plus a small stipend for books. The letter had come 3 days earlier, and I'd read it probably 40 times, touching the raised university seal like it was something holy. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Oakes, 22 years in public education, the kind of woman who remembered every student's name at every reunion, had called the house personally. She told my mother it was one of the strongest applications she'd ever seen come out of our district. My mother said, "How nice." Then she started planning the party. I told myself the party was a good sign. I told myself that maybe finally I was going to get the version of my parents that other kids seemed to have. The proud ones, the ones who framed things and cried at ceremonies and embarrassed you by telling strangers in grocery stores about your GPA. I wanted that so badly. I'd convinced myself I already had it. Standing there in that clearance rack dress with the scholarship letter folded in my cardigan pocket, watching my mother arrange fruit skewers on a table decorated with balloons that said, "Congratulations." She hadn't asked what my favorite color was when she bought the balloons. They were pink. Sloane's favorite color was pink. I told myself that was nothing. The backyard filled up around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Cousins I barely spoke to, aunts who smelled like Chanel and cigarettes, neighbors who'd watched me grow up quiet and studious and slightly invisible, my father's work friends, my mother's book club, everyone eating the food. My mother had spent 2 days preparing, and she was a genuinely wonderful cook, I'll give her that, chatting and laughing and moving around me like I was a piece of furniture that had been rearranged without anyone consulting the room. Sloane circulated the party like she'd been born for it. She was 16, already 5'8", with the kind of effortless honey blonde beauty that made adults say things like, "You should be a model," and mean it as a compliment rather than a dismissal. She'd hugged me when I arrived and said, "Congrats, hon," and I'd felt genuinely warm about it for maybe 90 seconds before I noticed she was wearing a new sundress my mother had clearly bought her for the occasion. No one had offered to buy me a dress. I told myself that was nothing too. Then my mother looked at me, really looked at me the way she did sometimes. Like she was performing a quiet inventory, and sighed. Not a tired sigh, a disappointed one. The kind that comes with the faint curl of something like regret. "At least she's smart," she said to my Aunt Deborah loud enough that the cluster of people nearest to them all heard it. God knows beauty skipped her. My father laughed into his beer. Sloane tilted her head to one side. 16 years old, and she'd already learned how to land a knife with a smile. "You look like somebody's substitute teacher," she said. The backyard laughed. Not all of it. There were people who looked away, who studied their plates, who found something very interesting happening near the punch bowl. But enough of it. Enough that the sound hit me like something physical, like a wave you don't see coming. And I stood there in my $14.99 clearance dress, holding a scholarship letter that represented 4 years of 4 a.m. study sessions, and every extracurricular I'd stuffed onto an application, and I thought, this is the celebration. I heard my own voice quiet and steady in a way I hadn't planned. "Why would you say that?" My mother's smile didn't disappear so much as retract like a blade going back into a handle. "Don't be dramatic. We're joking." It was never a joke when I was the punchline. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, because the version of this story my family told for years involved a lot of my crying, my instability, my sensitivity. I did not cry. I smiled at a few relatives, ate half a plate of food, watched the candles get lit on a cake that said, Hannah in blue icing, and thought with strange calm, I am leaving in 2 weeks and I don't think I'm coming back. I left in 2 weeks, 2 suitcases, $312 from the Kroger job held together with a rubber band at the bottom of my backpack. My roommate at OSU was a girl from Cleveland named Bridget, who talked in her sleep and made excellent ramen, and became over 4 years my first real evidence that chosen family was a thing that actually existed. My parents didn't drive me. My mother said they'd been planning to take Sloan to look at dance programs that weekend. She said this like it was logistical rather than a choice. I took the bus. By Thanksgiving that year, my childhood bedroom had been converted into Sloan's beauty room. A walk-in vanity setup complete with ring light and a new mirror my parents had apparently driven 90 minutes to Cincinnati to purchase. I know this because my cousin Meredith, who possessed neither cruelty nor tact in sufficient quantities to stay quiet about things, texted me a photo with the caption, "Did you know a bee? This I hadn't known." By Christmas, my name was missing from the family card. I found this out the same way. Meredith, who should genuinely have been a journalist, texting me a photo of the Whitaker family Christmas card featuring my parents Sloan and the family golden retriever Biscuit posed in front of a decorated tree. 4 subjects, not 5. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I put my phone face down and went back to studying for finals. By the following summer, relatives had begun speaking about me in past tense. My Aunt Deborah told someone at a 4th of July gathering, according to Meredith's increasingly detailed reporting, that Hannah had gone off to Columbus and just sort of disappeared from the family as though I were a fog, as though I had dissolved. I stopped calling. I stopped texting on birthdays. I stopped sending cards I'd spent real time choosing only to receive nothing in return, except occasionally a one-line reply from my father that felt like a form letter. I stopped begging for the version of them I'd wanted and accepted with the particular exhaustion of someone who has finally finished grieving something they were never going to get, that this was simply who they were, and I moved forward. 11 years is a long time. Long enough to finish undergrad in 3 years instead of 4. Long enough to complete medical school at Case Western, where my advisor, Dr. Leonard Chu, chief of plastic and reconstructive surgery, 15 years as an attending, the most precise and demanding person I have ever worked for, and also the best, told me during my 3rd year that I had instincts that couldn't be taught long enough to complete my residency at Massachusetts General in Boston, to specialize in reconstructive surgery, to spend my days rebuilding what fire and trauma and accident had destroyed. I put faces back together. I know how that sounds dramatic, almost cinematic, but that's what it was. Burn victims, blast injuries, accident survivors who'd been told they'd never look like themselves again. I performed the surgeries, worked through the complications, sat with patients in recovery rooms at 11 p.m. when the fear hit hardest. I watched people look in mirrors for the first time after months of being afraid to, and I watched something come back into their eyes. I was good at it. I was, by most professional measures, very good at it. I was 30 years old, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Back Bay with an excellent collection of medical journals and a small but fiercely loyal group of colleagues and friends when the ivory envelope arrived. Sloan Whitaker and Nathan Reed request the honor of your presence at their wedding. No note, no apology attached, no explanation for the 11-year gap between the last time my parents had included me in a Christmas card and this moment when my name had apparently been remembered and printed in clean embossed lettering on ivory stock. Just the invitation, the venue a vineyard outside Columbus. The date a Saturday in late September, an RSVP card with a checkbox for salmon or chicken. I set it on my kitchen counter and didn't touch it for 3 days. My colleague and closest friend, Dr. Amara Owe, reconstructive fellow 32, the most emotionally intelligent person I'd met in medicine, found it there when she came over Thursday evening. She picked it up, read it, and looked at me with the specific expression she reserved for situations she considered clinically interesting. "You're going," she said. "I haven't decided." "You're going," she said again and poured us both a glass of wine. We talked about it for 4 hours. I explained the clearance rack dress and the backyard party, and Meredith's text, and the Christmas card with 4 subjects. I explained 11 years of silence that I had not, contrary to whatever version of events my family had been circulating, initiated. Amara listened the way she always did, completely, without filling in the silences, without performing empathy. When I finished, she sat for a moment and said, "You've spent 11 years becoming Dr. Hannah Whitaker. I think you should go remind them of that. IRSVP for the salmon." I found the dress at a boutique in the South End, emerald green tailored at the waist, the kind of cut that required you to stand up straight, and meant it. It cost more than my first month's rent in grad school. I bought it without deliberating, which for me, a person who had once spent 45 minutes in a Target checkout line deciding between two pairs of socks, was its own kind of statement. I drove to Columbus the Friday before the wedding and checked into a hotel downtown. I didn't call my parents. I lay in the hotel bed that night, with the city noise filtering up through the window, and felt something I couldn't immediately name. Not nervousness, not anticipation, something older than that. Something that had been living in the back of my chest since a backyard party 11 years ago. Quiet and patient, waiting for the moment it would finally get to speak. The vineyard was genuinely beautiful. Rolling hills in early autumn gold, a white tent strung with soft lights round tables with centerpieces that probably cost more than my first college semester. I arrived precisely on time alone and walked in through the main entrance like I was walking into any other room. I'm a surgeon. I have walked into operating theaters to perform procedures that carried real risk of serious complications, and I have been calm enough to make the first incision without my hands shaking. I can walk into a wedding. I felt my mother before I saw her. The way the air near her changed. I'd been aware of it since childhood. Some animal instinct trained by years of monitoring her moods for safety. I turned and found her standing 15 feet away with a smile that froze the instant her eyes reached my face. The smile didn't disappear. It just stopped like a clock that's been paused rather than turned off. Her hand holding a champagne flute went very still. My father stopped talking mid-sentence to the man beside him. His eyes moved over me with the particular expression of someone trying to reconcile two conflicting pieces of information. I gave them both a small, composed smile. Neither of them moved toward me. Neither of them said my name. I kept walking. I found a seat near the back, nodded to a cousin I vaguely recognized, and watched the room. It was the kind of crowd that announces money and effort. Women in serious dresses, men in suits that fit correctly, an open bar doing early business. Sloane had built by all visible evidence an excellent life. I felt nothing complicated about that. I had no interest in her unhappiness. I'd simply come to be present, to be undeniable, to exist in a room that had once erased me. Then I saw Sloane being guided toward the entrance by a bridesmaid with a walkie-talkie, and she looked, I'll be honest about this, stunning. She was 27 and had grown into exactly the person her 16-year-old self had promised to become. Perfect posture, radiant under her bridal makeup. The gown was extraordinary. She saw me from across the room. The color left her face so completely and suddenly that the bridesmaid reached for her arm. I held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then looked away. The ceremony was brief and tasteful. I watched from the back row, composed hands folded in my lap. During the vows, I studied Nathan Reed, mid-30s, dark-haired with the look of someone who builds things not metaphorically but actually. There was something in the set of his shoulders, the quality of his stillness, that spoke of physical competence. He said his vows looking directly at Sloane with an expression of genuine feeling. Whatever else was about to happen, he loved her, or the version of her he believed he'd been marrying. The reception was already in comfortable motion, cocktail hour, winding down, guests moving toward the dinner tent when I was standing near the edge of the terrace with a glass of sparkling water, watching the vineyards and the fading light, and I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Nathan Reed was walking toward me with the direct, purposeful movement of someone with a specific destination, and he was looking at me with an expression I recognized from hospital hallways. The particular look of someone trying to place a face in the wrong context. He stopped 6 feet away, stared. "Hannah," he said, and then slowly, like a man watching something rearrange itself in real time. "Why didn't you tell me Sloane was your sister?" The terrace was not empty. There were a dozen guests close enough to hear, and the acoustics of open outdoor space are unkind to private conversations. Sloane appeared from somewhere to his left. She'd been watching. I realized, watching him cross the terrace toward me, and reached for his arm. Her fingers pressed in. "You know her?" Nathan didn't look at her immediately. He was still looking at me, and his voice when he answered was quiet and careful. The voice of a man who is beginning to understand that several things are not what he thought they were. "Dr. Whitaker saved my brother's face after the accident. The dinner tent was close enough that nearby guests heard. The conversations nearest to us didn't stop so much as slow. Then still the way water goes quiet before something surfaces. I remembered him then. Not from this, not from Sloane, not from any family context, because my family had not mentioned my name to me and had apparently not mentioned his name to me either. I remembered him from a hospital hallway at Massachusetts General on a Tuesday night in February 2 years ago. His brother Evan had been brought in after an industrial accident at a manufacturing facility outside Worcester. A gas line rupture, an explosion, a man caught in the proximity of it. The injuries were severe, the kind that make emergency responders go quiet, that make the intake nurses set their faces into professional neutrality while their eyes communicate something else. Evan Reed was 26 years old and half his jaw had been destroyed. I remember Nathan standing outside the O with blood. His brother's blood still on his shirt, because there hadn't been time to change because he'd driven straight from the site. He'd stopped me in the hallway, not dramatically, not hysterically, but with the focused urgency of a man who had used up all his panic and arrived at something colder and more determined on the other side of it. He'd asked me quietly if his brother was going to be able to look like himself again. I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. I told him we would do everything that could be done. We performed 6 surgeries over 14 months. I performed 4 of them. The 5th was a specialist we brought in from Johns Hopkins for the mandibular reconstruction. The 6th was follow-up from my colleague Dr. Priya Sharma, reconstructive surgeon, 11 years attending meticulous in a way that made our team better. By the end of it, Evan Reed could smile again. Not the smile he'd had before. Scars changed topology. Nerve regeneration is imperfect, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying, but a real smile his own. Nathan had sent a card after the final surgical clearance. Handwritten 2 paragraphs, the kind of thing people write when they mean it, and can't find a way to say it that doesn't sound insufficient. I'd kept it. I didn't keep many things, but I'd kept that. I hadn't known his last name was Reed, or I had known it. It had been in the charts, of course, but it had not connected to anything because why would it? Sloan had never mentioned a Nathan, and my family had not mentioned my name to anyone in their lives apparently, except as a cautionary tale. My family talks about you like you're a miracle, Nathan said. He said it simply without performance, just the fact of it. My mother made a sound I'd never heard from her before, something between a swallow and a word that didn't form. Sloan laughed, the slightly too high laugh of a person managing a situation, and said, "That's funny. Hannah never mentioned knowing you." "I haven't spoken to Hannah in 11 years, my father said. He said it sharply with the particular emphasis of a man who has told a version of this story enough times that the guilt has calcified into something that sounds from the outside like moral authority. As though my absence were a condition I had created and imposed, as though the 11 years were mine to carry. Nathan turned to him slowly. Why one word? No judgment in it, or no obvious judgment. Just the genuine, slightly baffled question of a man who had for the past 2 years heard the name doctor. Hannah Whitaker, spoken in his family's home with something close to reverence, and was now standing in front of her at his own wedding, and discovering she had a family he'd been told things about. My mother stepped in with the practiced smoothness of a woman who had spent decades managing social surfaces. Families drift apart. Nathan, it's complicated. I looked at her. I felt very calm. The kind of calm that isn't peace, but is its close structural relative. The kind that comes from having had 11 years to stop expecting things. Is that what we're calling it? I said. Sloane's eyes went hard. Don't start drama at my wedding. I didn't start anything, I said. Your fiancé asked a question. Nathan was quiet for a moment. He looked at my parents, then at Sloane. His jaw tightened in a specific way, the way it had in that hospital hallway when the panic had cleared and the focus had come in, when he decided to stay and deal with the facts rather than collapse under them. You told me, he said to Sloane, that your sister was unstable, that she cut the family off because she was jealous of you. The words hung in the air with the specific weight of something that's been said enough times to be believed. My chest clenched, not with surprise. I had suspected something like this in the abstract, not with hurt exactly, because the wound was old enough to have scar tissue with a kind of recognition. There it was, the working narrative, the explanation that had circulated through 11 years of relatives speaking about me in past tense, of cousins receiving the sanitized version of a family that had erased me and needed a reason why Hannah was unstable. Hannah was jealous. Hannah left because she was bitter. Not. We failed her at her own celebration. Not. We removed her name from Christmas cards. Not. We converted her bedroom before she'd finished her first semester. Hannah. My mother moved toward Nathan with the expression she wore at difficult dinner parties. Warm, reasonable, privately furious. This really isn't the time, I think Nathan said, and his voice had gone very quiet, which in my experience is never the voice of a calm person, but often the voice of a controlled one. This is exactly the time because the woman you described as bitter and broken is the person my brother credits with giving him his life back. Whispers moved through the guests near the terrace. Not the titillated kind, something more uncomfortable than that, the kind that happens when people are witnessing something real and don't know where to put their eyes. Sloane's smile cracked. not all at once in stages like a structure taking on stress. Each point of failure visible before the next one gives. She was 27 years old and had been for her entire life the one who came out ahead. The one the room oriented toward, the one my parents framed and praised and centered, while I stood slightly to the left of the frame, holding a scholarship letter no one asked to read. A woman in the front row of the nearest guest cluster stood up. I hadn't noticed her during the ceremony, silver-haired, straight-backed, dressed with the specific quiet elegance of someone who doesn't need to announce herself. She stood with the unhurried certainty of a person accustomed to being listened to when they speak. Marianne Reed, Nathan's mother. She looked directly at Sloane. "You told me," she said with the particular evenness of someone delivering information rather than accusation, "that Hannah refused family events because she believed she was too successful for everyone, that she'd made it clear she wanted distance." Sloane's face in that moment did something I don't have precise language for. It crumbled isn't right. She didn't fall apart. It was more like the scaffolding became visible, the structure beneath the performance suddenly legible. She said, "I didn't know Nathan knew her." Not, "That isn't true." Not, "I'm sorry." Not even the deflection of, "It's complicated." Families drift. Only the specific confession of someone caught. "I didn't know I'd get caught." Nathan took one step backward, not dramatic, not theatrical, just one step. Slow and deliberate. The inch of physical space that communicates a recalibration away from Sloane, toward something else, or toward nothing yet but away. "Sloane," he said still quietly, "I need to know who I'm marrying." 200 guests. The vineyard light going golden and long in the late afternoon. A wedding cake somewhere inside that hadn't been cut yet. And the look on my sister's face told every single person watching that she didn't have an answer that could save her. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that, because the version of this story that satisfies people most cleanly involves me feeling triumphant. Walking away with my chin up while Sloane crumbles. That's not what I felt. I felt tired. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has finally in public been allowed to set it down. I also felt seen by a room full of strangers in a way I had not been seen at 18 by the people who were supposed to love me. The next few hours were complicated. Professionally speaking, Nathan's best man, a practical-seeming man named Derek, materialized quickly and began the project of damage control. Guests were guided back inside. Marianne Reed sat with her son in a quiet corner of the vineyard for a very long time. My parents found me twice. My mother with the look of someone preparing a version of events. My father with the look of someone who had said why in a one-word question and was now trying to determine the cost. I was not cruel to them. I want that on record, because cruelty would have been easy and would have felt briefly like power. I told my mother quietly and without performance that I had not cut the family off, that the family had cut me off, and that I had 11 years of one-sided silence available as evidence if she'd like to revisit the chronology. I told my father that I hoped genuinely that he was well. Then I walked away and did not go back. The wedding, to my knowledge, did not proceed that evening as planned. Derek texted Nathan's cousin, who texted Meredith, who texted me at 11:47 p.m. with a string of messages that I read from my hotel bed, with something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite sadness, but contained elements of both. Nathan and Sloane had left separately. The venue had been paid for regardless. The cake had apparently eventually been cut by someone for the guests who remained, because 200 people had traveled and eaten salmon, and it seemed unkind to send them home without dessert. I appreciated that detail. The cake. Someone had thought to cut the cake. I drove back to Boston on Sunday. I stopped for coffee in a town whose name I didn't catch, a diner with vinyl stools and coffee that had been sitting too long. And I sat there for 20 minutes alone with my cup and the Sunday quiet and thought about the thing I'd carried for 11 years and what exactly I was going to do with it now that I'd set it down. Amara called me before I'd reached the highway on-ramp. I told her what had happened, the terrace. Nathan's questioned Marianne, standing up the one step backward. She listened without interrupting, which was her particular gift. When I finished, she said, "How do you feel I thought about it?" The clearance rack dress, the backyard, laughing 11 years of being spoken about in past tense. The moment Nathan Reed looked at my father and said, "Why?" with the simple, genuine bafflement of someone who had spent 2 years believing I was a miracle. "I feel like I can close a file," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's the most urgent answer I've ever heard." I laughed. It surprised me. The genuine, unguarded quality of it coming up out of somewhere I hadn't expected. 3 months later, a card arrived at my office at Mass General, handwritten like the first one, Nathan's handwriting, which I recognized. He thanked me not for anything dramatic, not for showing up, not for the wedding, not for whatever cosmic machinery had put us in the same vineyard that September afternoon. He thanked me for his brother for 4 surgeries in 14 months and the careful, unglamorous work of putting something broken back together. He said Evan had gone back to work, had gotten engaged, had apparently been teaching himself to make pasta from scratch, which seemed to Nathan like definitive proof of recovery. He said, "I don't know what my family told yours about you over the years, but I want you to know what we told ours. We told them you were extraordinary. We still do." I held the card for a while, set it next to the first one in the drawer where I kept things I didn't want to lose. Then I went back to work. I had a surgery at 7 the next morning. A 23-year-old named Marcus, a warehouse worker from Dorchester, who'd been caught in a machinery accident that had done serious damage to the left side of his face. He was terrified, and he was angry. And he had a mother who sat in the waiting room in a plastic chair and would not leave. Not for food, not for coffee, not for the social worker who came twice to offer her things. Before I went in, I stopped in the hallway outside his room, stood there for a moment with the particular stillness I'd developed over years of doing this. Not meditation, nothing so organized, just a moment of being present before the work demanded everything. Then I put on my gloves and went in. That's the job. You show up, you do the work, you help people look in mirrors again. My mother called twice in the month after the wedding. I didn't answer either time. She left messages, careful, precisely worded messages that managed to express regret without consigned any specific wrongdoing, which was an impressive technical achievement and exactly what I'd have expected. My father didn't call. Meredith texted me a month after that to say she'd run into my parents at a family gathering and that my mother had referred to the wedding as a difficult situation and that Sloan was, according to latest report, living in Cincinnati and had not, as far as Meredith knew, been in contact with Nathan since the night of the vineyard. I thought about that. The thing Sloan had said without meaning to in front of 200 people. I didn't know Nathan knew her. Not a denial, not an apology, a logistics failure. She'd built a version of me and deployed it without checking whether it had been load tested against reality. And reality had, in the end, provided its own stress test. I didn't call Sloan. I'm not sure I will. Not because I'm holding the wound open. I'm genuinely not. I've done too much work on that particular scar to want to peel it back. But because forgiveness, the real kind, isn't owed to someone just because time has passed and they got caught. It's something I give when I'm ready, on my own terms, because it serves my healing rather than their absolution. Maybe someday, maybe not. What I know is this. I was 18 years old in a 14.99 clearance dress and a backyard full of people eating food that was supposed to celebrate me, and the people who were supposed to be proudest of me made me the punchline instead. And I left and I became someone. Not in spite of them. Exactly. The clarity of grief is a real force, and I've used mine. But alongside that grief with it as a kind of fuel burning off in the background of every long night in medical school, every surgery that went over by 4 hours, every patient I sat with in a recovery room at midnight, because the fear was too big to leave them alone, in Dr. Hannah Whitaker, reconstructive surgeon, Boston. I help people look in mirrors again. And at a vineyard outside Columbus on a Saturday in late September, a man named Nathan Reed turned around at his own wedding and said my name across a room of 200 people. Not to the family that had spent 11 years erasing me, but about me. In the voice you use when you're saying something true. And the cake hadn't even been cut yet. That's enough. That's more than enough.